They told me I was being detained for a grave accusation and an organized scheme that would result in a massive prison sentence. But the real nightmare began when they showed me video proof of a crime I wouldn't commit for another 3 hours. I thought I was being framed by a rival corporation until I realized the man pulling the strings was the only person I had ever trusted. The fluorescent lights of the corporate lobby hummed with a sterile, soul-crushing frequency. I adjusted my silk blazer, checking my reflection in the polished glass of the elevator doors. Today was the pinnacle of a decade of grinding. I was 32, the youngest senior VP in the history of Meridian Global, and in 20 minutes I would be signing the merger deal that would cement my legacy. My phone buzzed. A message from the CEO. "Don't let them rattle you. The auditors are just a formality." I didn't think twice about the men standing by the revolving doors. They were dressed in charcoal suits that looked slightly too heavy, their shoulders squared with a military precision that stood out in our lobby of tailored Italian wool. They weren't employees, and they certainly weren't delivery drivers. I walked past them with the confidence that only a 7-figure salary can provide, my heels clicking sharply against the marble. "Eleanor Vance?" The voice was cold, clipped, and devoid of professional courtesy. I stopped, turning back with a polite, practiced smile. I expected a journalist or perhaps a junior analyst with a last-minute spreadsheet error. Instead, I found myself looking into the eyes of a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His partner stood a step behind him, hand resting suspiciously close to his belt. "Yes, that's me. Do we have an appointment?" I asked, my voice steady. The man didn't answer. He simply reached into his inner pocket, pulled out a thick document, and snapped his cuffs against his palm. "Eleanor Vance, you're being detained on a grave accusation. We have information linking you to an organized scheme involving the transfer of illicit assets and the concealment of prohibited substances." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that died instantly in the cavernous room. "Excuse me? Is this some kind of sick prank?" "I'm here for a merger, not a screenplay." "This isn't a joke," the man replied, stepping into my personal space. The scent of stale coffee and something metallic, like dry oil, clung to him. "We have surveillance records, digital trails, and eyewitness statements. You've been under the watch of the Internal Security Division for 6 months. You're coming with us." "I have rights," I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I want to call my legal team. I want to know who is behind this." "Your legal team can't help you with a charge this heavy," he countered, grabbing my wrist. The steel of the handcuffs was ice cold against my skin. The click echoed through the silent lobby, a definitive, final sound that stripped me of my title, my office, and my identity in a single second. People were stopping now. Colleagues I had known for years, people I'd shared drinks and secrets with, were huddled behind the receptionist's desk, their phones out, filming. The humiliation burned hotter than the fear. I caught the eye of Marcus, my assistant, who looked at me not with concern, but with a terrifying, blank detachment. He knew. "You've got the wrong woman," I hissed, leaning in close so only the lead agent could hear. "I don't know anything about prohibited substances or organized schemes. If you touch me, my firm will bury you in litigation before the sun sets." The agent's face remained a mask of indifference. He leaned down, his breath brushing my ear, and whispered words that made the floor feel like it was dropping out from under me. "We aren't here for the merger, Ms. Vance. We found the illicit storage unit in your name. We found the weapons. And we found the ledger that links your offshore accounts to the radicals we've been tracking for years." The world tilted. "Storage unit? What storage unit?" My mind raced, trying to find a hole in his logic, but my memory was a blank slate of corporate meetings and late-night emails. I was being framed, meticulously and perfectly, and the person who had set the trap knew every detail of my life. "Get her to the transport," the lead agent barked, signaling to his partner. As they dragged me toward the exit, I saw him. Through the massive glass panes of the lobby, standing across the street under the shadow of an awning, was a man in a beige trench coat. He wasn't moving. He wasn't watching the arrests. He was watching me. He held a black umbrella despite the clear, sunny sky. And as I was shoved into the back of an unmarked van, He raised a hand to his face, adjusted his glasses, and gave me a single, slow nod of acknowledgement. The doors slammed shut, plunging me into darkness. The engine roared to life and the van lurched forward, pulling away from the life I had spent my entire existence building. As we merged into the heavy city traffic, the lead agent sat across from me, pulling out a tablet. He tapped a few keys and turned the screen toward me. My breath caught in my throat. It was a video, recorded from inside my own apartment, from an angle that suggested a camera hidden in my bedroom mirror. It showed me sleeping, while a hooded figure placed a heavy, dark-cased duffel bag under my floorboards. I was being destroyed. And as I looked closer at the date stamp on the video, I realized the timestamp was set for exactly 3 hours from now. I wasn't just being arrested for a crime I hadn't committed. I was being arrested for a future that hadn't even happened yet. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The conspiracy wasn't just organized, it was prophetic. And as the van took a sharp turn, heading away from the city center and toward a facility that didn't exist on any map, I knew the worst part wasn't the cuffs or the potential for a massive prison sentence. It was the fact that the person who set me up wasn't a stranger. I knew the silhouette of that hooded figure. I knew exactly who had just signed my death warrant. The interior of the van smelled of synthetic leather and stale, recycled air. I sat in the darkness, my pulse thrumming in my ears like a war drum. Every time the vehicle hit a pothole, the metal of the cuffs bit deeper into my wrists, leaving angry, red welts on my skin. I tried to focus, to compartmentalize like I had in every board meeting that had ever gone sideways. If I could just talk to someone, if I could just explain the logistical impossibility of the timestamp, surely they would listen. "The video," I said, my voice cracking. "The timestamp on that video. It's in the future. That's impossible. You have to realize that this is a fabrication." The agent in the passenger seat didn't even turn around. He just tapped his tablet screen, his finger hovering over a button. "Logic doesn't matter where we're going, Ms. Vance. The Internal Security Division doesn't work with clocks. They work with certainties. If the system says you'll commit the act, then you're as good as guilty. The trial is just a formality to verify the data." I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. This wasn't a standard police interrogation. This was something far more sinister, a machinery of power that operated outside the boundaries of due process. I thought about the man across the street, the beige coat, the nod. He hadn't been waiting for the arrest. He had been waiting for the confirmation. "Who are you working for?" I demanded, leaning forward as much as the restraints allowed. "Meridian Global, the board of directors. If they paid you to get rid of me, I can double it. Whatever they promised you, I have assets you don't even know exist." The lead agent finally turned, a grim, humorless smile spreading across his face. "You think this is about money? You think the people who pull these strings care about the bottom line of a pharmaceutical conglomerate? Eleanor, you were a rising star, yes, but you were also a liability. You asked too many questions about the logistics of the shipping containers in the Mediterranean. You tried to audit the internal supply chain. You poked the bear, and now you're being fed to it." My mind raced back to last month. The shipping manifests for the Levant project. There had been a discrepancy in the weight of the cargo, a difference of nearly 2 tons that couldn't be explained by medical supplies or computer hardware. I had flagged it. I had demanded an explanation, and I had been told by the CEO himself to let it go for the sake of the merger. I hadn't let it go. I had started a private inquiry. The van came to a jarring halt. The tires screeched against wet pavement, and the back doors swung open with a violent metallic clang. We weren't at a station. We weren't at any government building I recognized. We were in an industrial sector, a place of rusted shipping containers and flickering halogen streetlights. It looked like the docks, but there was no ocean, only a vast concrete expanse surrounding a windowless, monolithic building that seemed to absorb the light. "Out!" the agent barked. I stepped out, my legs trembling. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and burning rubber. The man in the trench coat was there, waiting by the entrance. As I was marched toward the building, he stepped into the light. He wasn't a stranger. He was Julian, the chief of operations at Meridian. He was the one who had mentored me, the one who had hired me straight out of business school. He was the only person who knew my private encryption keys, Julian, I gasped, the betrayal hitting me harder than the cold wind. You? Why? Julian didn't look at me. He looked at the agent. Is the file secured? Everything is here, sir. The digital footprint matches the profile perfectly. We have enough to ensure she disappears into the system for decades. Good, Julian said, finally glancing at me. His expression wasn't angry or vengeful. It was chillingly clinical. Elena, you were brilliant, truly. But you were always too curious for your own good. You wanted to know what was in those containers. You're about to find out exactly where they end up. He gestured to the heavy steel door in front of us. It groaned open, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor that descended into the earth. It wasn't a prison cell. It was a laboratory of sorts, filled with humming servers and banks of monitors. I realized then that my arrest wasn't to put me in a jail cell. It was to recruit me, or, if that failed, to erase me. As they pushed me inside, Julian leaned in close, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. The Internal Security Division doesn't just catch people, Elena. They harvest the ones who are smart enough to look behind the curtain. You're going to work for us now. You're going to help us finalize the distribution of the prohibited substances you found, and you're going to do it with a smile, because the alternative isn't just a massive prison sentence. It's a total systemic deletion. I stopped in my tracks, refusing to move. You think I'll help you? You're insane. Julian chuckled, a sound devoid of humanity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small glass vial containing a swirling, dark liquid. He held it up to the light. I don't need your help willingly. I just need you to be a part of the narrative. And if you refuse, well, we've already recorded your confession using the deepfake software we developed. The world will see you not as a victim, but as the mastermind of a global, organized scheme. He signaled to the agents who grabbed me by the arms, dragging me deeper into the belly of the facility. I struggled, kicking and shouting, but the heavy boots of the guards muffled my protests. We arrived at a door marked with a biohazard symbol. They forced me to my knees in front of a console. Logan, Julian commanded, use your credentials, authorize the shipment, or we release the edited footage of you admitting to the entire operation right now. I looked at the keyboard, my fingers hovering over the keys. If I logged in, I was complicit. If I didn't, my life was over. But as I glanced at the side monitor, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just a list of shipments, it was a list of names, a list of targets, and at the very top of the list, marked in bold red text, was my own name, labeled Phase 1 Disposed. I realized then that there was no job offer. There was no recruitment. I was already dead. They were just using my administrative privileges to sign off on the final, lethal logistics before they liquidated me. My hand shook as I reached for the terminal, but instead of typing my password, I lunged for the emergency fire alarm on the wall, hoping to trigger the suppression system. As the alarm shrieked, the lights cut out, plunging us into total, suffocating darkness. In the chaos, I felt a warm, firm hand clamp over my mouth from behind, and a whisper in my ear that wasn't one of the guards. Don't scream. I'm the only person in this building who doesn't want you dead. The darkness in the room was absolute, heavy enough to feel like a shroud. The hand over my mouth was calloused, the grip firm but oddly protective. I froze, my heart rate spiking to a frantic, painful rhythm. Every instinct screamed at me to bite, to thrash, to break free, but the voice, low, steady, and vibrating with an urgency I couldn't ignore, kept me anchored. Be silent, the shadow whispered again, his breath cool against my ear. The fire suppression system will buy us exactly 40 seconds of visibility disruption. If you breathe, if you move, if you make a single sound that alerts the guards, we both leave this place in a body bag. My mind raced. Who could possibly be in here? The building was a fortress of Julian's making, staffed by his private security. I felt the pressure on my mouth release, and I took a shaky, shallow breath of air, thick with the metallic tang of fire retardant. "Who are you?" I hissed, barely audible over the roaring of the overhead sprinklers. "A ghost," the man replied. He didn't let go of my arm. "I'm the one who sent you the anonymous files regarding the weight discrepancies. You didn't listen to the warnings, Elena. You kept digging, and now you're here." I remembered the encrypted emails, the ones I'd dismissed as corporate spam, or a disgruntled whistleblower's attempt to get me involved in a scandal. You? You're the one who started this? I'm the one who tried to stop it, he countered. He pulled me toward a corner, his movements fluid and practiced. He had night vision goggles. I could see the faint glow of his silhouette against the dark. Julian isn't just selling substances. He's liquidating the firm. He's taking the assets, framing the board, and using your digital signature to authorize the transfer of every penny to an offshore location that doesn't exist on any map. By tomorrow, Meridian Global will be an empty shell, and you will be the face of an international criminal investigation that will result in a massive prison sentence. They need a martyr for the state media to tear apart. The alarm continued to wail, a dissonant screeching sound that was beginning to trigger the automatic locking doors of the facility. If the seals engaged, we would be trapped in this tomb forever. We need to get to the server room, I whispered, my brain finally snapping back into executive mode. If I can override the authorization, if I can upload the true ledger to the public cloud, I can stop the transfer. I can expose them. If you access the terminal, you trigger a silent kill switch in your own biometric signature, the man said, his tone grim. Julian designed the system to recognize your palm print. If you touch that console, it's a death sentence, not just a career ender. Then we destroy the data, I said, a sudden, desperate resolve taking root. We don't try to save it. We wipe it. If the ledger is gone, the organized scheme fails. If they can't prove the transaction occurred, they can't pin the accusation on me. The man went quiet for a moment. Outside the door, I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots. They were coming. Julian was losing patience. You have a plan, I urged. Talk to me. The ventilation shaft, he gestured upward. It leads to the sub-level maintenance tunnel. From there, we have a window of 3 minutes to reach the main power relay. We cut the power, we dump the coolant, and we force the server to overheat. It'll destroy the drive, but it'll also trigger an alarm that will bring the local authorities, not Julian's puppets, but the city police. It's a gamble. You'll have to explain why you were here, but it's better than being a ghost. He boosted me up, his hand steady as I gripped the cold, greasy metal of the vent. As I hauled myself into the cramped space, I looked down one last time. The red emergency lights flickered on, illuminating the room for a split second. I saw the guards bursting through the doors, their weapons drawn. And there, standing behind them, was Julian. He wasn't looking at the guards. He was looking straight up at the vent. He smiled, and I realized with a sickening jolt that he hadn't been surprised by the alarm. He had been waiting for me to lead someone to him. He knew, I whispered to the man as he crawled in beside me. He knew you were here. He was waiting for us to make a move. It doesn't matter, the man replied, pulling a device from his belt, a small, glowing magnetic pulse generator. We're already past the point of no return. He slammed the generator against the support beam of the ventilation shaft. The metal groaned, and the entire structure began to vibrate violently. Below us, the sound of shouting erupted as the guards realized where we were. Jump, the man commanded, looking down into the dark, churning machinery of the sublevel. If you want to live, you jump now. I looked down at the dark, spinning gears and the abyss of the maintenance shaft. It was a fall of at least 20 feet into a mess of hydraulic lines. My career, my life, my reputation. All of it felt like a dream I had woken up from in a nightmare. I looked at the man beside me, searching his face for a reason to trust him. In the red light, I saw a tattoo on his wrist, the same logo that had been on the mysterious crates in the Mediterranean. Wait, I gasped, recoiling. That mark. You aren't trying to stop the operation. You're part of the rival group trying to seize control of it. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. I never said I was on your side, Elena. I just said I didn't want you dead. There's a difference. Before I could process the betrayal, he shoved me. I fell, screaming, into the dark, plummeting toward the machinery that was already grinding into motion. Just as I hit the metal grating below, I saw him slide down after me, but he wasn't coming to help. He reached out, not for my hand, but for the flash drive I had instinctively palmed from the desk earlier, the drive that held the only proof that Julian was a criminal. He snatched it from my pocket midair and landed on the other side of the partition, the heavy steel door between us slamming shut and locking him in with the data, leaving me alone in the dark, with the guards closing in from the vents above. The weight of the steel door was absolute. I threw my shoulder against it, the metal vibrating with the frantic, heavy boots of the men pursuing us from above. On the other side, the man, the one with the mysterious tattoo, the one who had played me like a grandmaster, was laughing. It was a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the ventilation shafts like a death knell. He had the flash drive. He had the leverage. And as I scrambled backward, the red emergency lights flickered, casting long, grotesque shadows against the walls of the maintenance tunnel. I was trapped. Below me, the massive churning gears of the cooling system roared with the force of a locomotive, threatening to pull me into the machinery if I lost my footing. Above me, the hatch clicked open. A sliver of blinding white light cut through the gloom, and then a face appeared. Not Julian, but someone far more dangerous. It was Sarah, the head of the Internal Security Division. She didn't look like a bureaucrat anymore. She held a suppressed pistol, her eyes scanning the dark with a predator's precision. "Elena," she called out, her voice unnervingly calm. "You've made a terrible mistake. You think you're running from a criminal, but you're actually running from the only people who can offer you a witness protection program for the rest of your life." I backed away, my heels clicking on the damp concrete. "You're working with them," I spat, my voice echoing. "You're all part of the same network, the organized scheme, the weapons, the shipments. It's all state-sanctioned, isn't it?" Sarah stepped down from the vent, her boots landing silently. She ignored my question, her focus fixed on the door that separated me from the man with the drive. "Give it up, Elena. The man on the other side of that door? He's not going to release that data to the press. He's going to sell it back to the highest bidder in the government. You're just a loose thread in a very expensive tapestry. We're here to cut you out." My mind raced. If I stayed here, I was a ghost. If I went with her, I was an accessory to whatever nightmare was being manufactured in this basement. I looked at the wall beside me, an old rusted service panel marked with a faded danger sign. I didn't know what was behind it, but it was my only exit. "You want the data?" I yelled, my eyes darting toward the panel. "You'll never find it. I encrypted it with a rolling code algorithm. It's tied to my heartbeat. If my pulse stops, the server wipes everything, including the backups." It was a lie, a desperate, pathetic bluff. But Sarah hesitated. Her eyes widened, and for a fleeting second, the cold mask of the authority she represented cracked. She needed that drive. She needed the leverage to secure her own position in the coming power vacuum. "You're bluffing," she said, raising the weapon. "You don't have the technical expertise for a kill switch like that." "Try me," I countered, reaching for the heavy lever on the service panel. "You pull that trigger, you lose everything. You lose the evidence, you lose your promotion, and you lose your job when I'm found with a bullet in my head that clearly didn't come from a standard issue weapon." I saw her finger tighten on the trigger. Time seemed to stretch, agonizingly thin. The roar of the cooling system felt like it was consuming the very air in the room. I didn't wait for her to decide. I yanked the lever down with everything I had. The floor beneath me didn't just vibrate, it shrieked. A massive high-pressure steam pipe burst, engulfing the tunnel in a blinding, scalding white fog. I felt the heat sear my skin, but I dove into the opening behind the panel just as the bullet tore through the air where my head had been a second before. I tumbled into a narrow vertical chute, sliding down into the darkness, the metal scraping my arms raw. I hit the bottom with a jarring thud, landing on a pile of refuse and discarded circuit boards. I was in the sub-basement, a place of total shadow, forgotten by the architects of this place. I gasped for air, my lungs burning, but the sound of the steam explosion above was already being drowned out by the heavy, systematic clanging of search teams securing the levels above. Then a light flickered in the corner, a small handheld lantern sitting on a workbench. Beside it, a man sat in a chair, his back to me. He was wearing the same charcoal suit as the agents, but he was missing the tactical gear. He was holding a glass of amber liquid, swirling it as if he were waiting for a late-night guest. "You're persistent, Elena," the man said, his voice smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly familiar. It was the CEO, the man who had been my mentor, my employer, and the man I had worshipped for years. Most people would have given up at the first sign of trouble. Most people would have taken the offer to disappear. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing a heavy wrench from the workbench. "You," I whispered, my voice trembling with rage. "You're the one behind it all. The storage units, the weapons, the illicit substances. It wasn't Julian. It was you." He stood up, turning to face me. He didn't look like a villain. He looked like the man who had sat at the head of the boardroom table, teaching me how to close a deal. "It's not about the things you found, Elena. It's about the fact that you thought you were smart enough to understand the scale of the game. You were never meant to be a VP. You were always meant to be the fall girl." He walked toward me, his hands empty, his expression one of pity. "Do you hear that?" In the distance I heard the sound of sirens, not one or two, but dozens. The city police were coming, but they weren't coming for him. They were coming for the facility. And as the ceiling above us began to buckle, I realized with a final, crushing horror that he hadn't just lured me here to frame me. He had lured me here to be the sole survivor of a mass casualty event he was about to orchestrate. He reached into his coat, pulled out a small metallic detonator, and held it up. "When the walls come down," he whispered, "I need someone to be the face of the tragedy, Elena. Someone to tell the world how you, in a fit of madness, destroyed everything." He pressed the button, and the floor dropped out from under us. The sensation of weightlessness was a brief, violent mercy before the crushing impact of the debris. Dust, jagged concrete, and the screech of twisting metal turned the world into a chaotic, suffocating swirl. I wasn't falling into an abyss. I was falling into the heart of the machine. The CEO, my mentor, my executioner, hadn't just triggered a collapse. He had triggered a systematic purge. I landed on a massive reinforced ventilation grating that had held firm against the collapse, cushioning me from the worst of the wreckage. Above, the entire upper level of the facility was imploding, the sound like 1,000 freight trains colliding. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The CEO was nowhere to be seen. He had planned his exit route with the same clinical precision he used to sign corporate mergers. I looked up through the swirling dust. The emergency lights were dead, but the glare of emergency vehicles began to bleed through the fissures in the ceiling. Sirens were shrieking from every direction. I had to move. I had to reach the surface, or I would be buried beneath a lie that would haunt history books for decades. I scrambled through the rubble, my hands bleeding, my blazer torn into rags. I found the emergency ladder, the one the man with the tattoo had mentioned, and started to climb. Every muscle in my body screamed, but I didn't stop. I reached the service door, pushed it open with a shoulder-shattering shove, and tumbled out into the cool, night air of the city. The scene was a nightmare. Dozens of police cruisers, ambulances, and unmarked black SUVs were swarming the site. Reporters were already clamoring at the police lines, cameras flashing like strobe lights. I stood there, a ghost covered in white dust and blood, watching as the authorities moved in. But they weren't securing the building to save lives. They were securing it to sanitize the crime scene. "There, over there," a voice shouted. It was Sarah. She was standing by a police captain, pointing directly at me. The betrayal felt like a cold blade in my gut. They weren't going to let me tell the truth. They were going to label me the madwoman who caused the explosion. I didn't run. I couldn't. I looked at the crowd, then at the news cameras, and then I saw him. The man with the tattoo. He was standing on the periphery, holding his phone up. He wasn't running, he was broadcasting. I realized then that he hadn't been working with the CEO or the government. He had been playing both sides to force a public confrontation. He caught my eye and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He dropped his phone, leaving it recording on a police barricade, and vanished into the shadows of the alleyway. I surged forward, ignoring the officers who were closing in on me. I grabbed the phone from the barricade. It was live, a global stream. "My name is Elena Vance," I screamed, my voice rasping, echoing over the roar of the crowd. I held the phone up, the red live icon burning in the corner of the screen. "And if you're seeing this, you're looking at the evidence that the Meridian Global collapse wasn't an accident. It was a planned liquidation." I looked straight into the lens, locking eyes with the millions of people watching the stream. I detailed everything. The prohibited substances, the illegal weapons, the names of the board members, and the hidden offshore accounts that were, at that very second, being drained by the men who claimed to represent the law. I didn't hold back. I poured my soul into that screen until the officers tackled me to the ground. The transition from the chaos of the scene to the cold, sterile silence of a holding cell was instantaneous. But for the first time in weeks, the fear was gone. The cell door opened 3 days later. It wasn't a guard. It was a woman in a gray suit, accompanied by 2 men in suits that didn't look like they belonged to any local department. They weren't police. They were internal investigators from an independent federal oversight committee, the only people who hadn't been bought. "The video," the woman said, holding a tablet. "It's been viewed over 200 million times. You've done more damage to the organized scheme in 10 minutes than we have in 10 years. "Am I going to prison?" I asked, my voice steady. She looked at me, a flicker of genuine respect in her eyes. "You're going to be a witness, Elena. And then you're going to be a consultant. The people you exposed are already being rounded up. Your mentor, he was caught trying to cross the border with the digital keys to the accounts. The massive prison sentence you were threatened with. That's for him now." I stood up, the weight of the last month finally lifting from my shoulders. I walked toward the door, leaving the handcuffs behind on the metal bench. I stepped out into the hallway, the light of the morning sun hitting my face. My career at Meridian was over. My reputation as a corporate shark had been replaced by the image of a woman who stood up to a monolithic shadow. I had lost everything, and in doing so, I had regained the only thing that mattered, my own agency. As I walked out of the building, I saw the man with the tattoo watching from across the street. He didn't approach. He just adjusted his glasses, turned, and walked away into the morning traffic. I had survived the system that was built to consume me, and as I hailed a cab, I finally understood the truth. They hadn't arrested the wrong woman. They had arrested the only woman who would dare to burn their world to the ground to save her own conscience. My name was Elena Vance, and for the first time in my life, I was finally free.